Marcus Bellamy walked into the building he had funded for 11 years and found a stranger sitting in his chair. He thought it was a mistake. It was not a mistake. Within 90 days, the company his wife believed she ran would learn who had truly been holding it upright all along. If stories about quiet people who are pushed too far move you, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe, because what unfolds here is worth watching to the very end. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from today, because I genuinely want to know who's in the room with me. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened. The office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower in the financial district, a corner suite with a view of the river, and for 11 years it had belonged to Marcus. Not officially, not on any organizational chart, but by right of the work done inside it. Marcus was 48 years old, a structural financial architect by training, the kind of man who could look at a company's books and see where the load was carried and where the cracks were forming. He was quiet. He wore the same 3 suits in rotation. He spoke softly enough that people in meetings often leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. And he was married to Diana Bellamy, the celebrated chief executive of Meridian Design Group, a firm that everyone in the city believed she had built with her own 2 hands. Everyone believed that because Diana told them so. She was 50, sharp as cut glass, and she filled a room the way weather fills a valley. She gave the interviews. She stood on the stages. She accepted the awards with a modest tilt of the head that suggested the whole thing had simply happened to her through sheer force of talent. And Marcus, standing at the back of those rooms, applauding, had let her have every bit of it. He did not need the applause. He had never needed the applause. What he had was the quiet knowledge of what was actually true. And for a long time, that had been enough. The truth was this. When Diana had launched Meridian 16 years earlier, when she was 34 and Marcus was 32, she had launched it on a business loan that came from Marcus's family trust, arranged by Marcus, guaranteed by Marcus, and structured so carefully that the interest terms had kept the young company alive through 2 recessions. The truth was that the office building itself, the glass tower everyone admired, was held by a property company. And the property company was owned, through a chain of holdings that Diana had never bothered to read, by Marcus. He had bought the building at the bottom of a market crash when Diana said it was too risky, and he had leased it back to Meridian at a rate so generous that the savings alone had funded years of the firm's expansion. Marcus was, in the plainest possible terms, his wife's landlord, her creditor, and the silent architect of nearly every deal that had made her famous. He had never once said it out loud. That, it would turn out, had been his mistake and his weapon both. It began on a Tuesday in March. Marcus had spent the morning at a hospital appointment he had not told Diana about, a routine follow-up on his heart that had come back clean, and he had walked to the office afterward feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He rode the elevator to the 14th floor, nodded to the receptionist who had worked there since the beginning, and turned the corner toward his suite. The door was open. His nameplate was gone. And, behind his desk, feet up, phone pressed to his ear and laughing at something, sat a man he did not recognize. The man was perhaps 35, tanned in the way of people who ski in winter, wearing a watch that cost more than most people's cars. He glanced up at Marcus with the mild irritation of someone whose privacy has been interrupted. "Can I help you?" he said, not lowering the phone. Marcus stood in the doorway of the room he had occupied for 11 years, looking at the stranger in his chair, and said nothing at first. He had trained himself over decades of negotiation to gather information before he spent a single word, so he simply looked. He saw that his files were gone from the shelf. He saw that a new coat, a very expensive new coat, hung on the hook where his own coat had hung that morning. He saw a framed photograph on the desk that was not his. And into that silence walked Diana, coffee in hand, mid-sentence, and she stopped when she saw her husband standing there. "Marcus," she said, not surprised, exactly, prepared. I didn't expect you until this afternoon." "I finished early," Marcus said. His voice was even. "There's a man at my desk." Diana set her coffee down on a side table with the deliberate calm of someone who had rehearsed this. "This is Julian," she said. "Julian Vance. He's our new chief operations officer. I brought him on last week." She paused, and something hardened in her expression, something that had been waiting a long time to come out. "And Marcus, that isn't really your desk. It never was. You don't have a role here. You never had a title. This is a professional office, and I need it for people who do professional work." Julian, still on the phone, gave a small laugh into the receiver, as if the whole scene amused him. There are moments when a marriage reveals what it has quietly become, and Marcus understood that this was one of them. Diana was not embarrassed. She was not apologizing. She was not scrambling to explain. She had made a decision, and Julian in his chair was the shape of that decision made physical. Marcus looked at his wife of 20 years, and he felt the strangest sensation. Not rage. Not even the sharp cut of betrayal, though that would come later. In the dark, what he felt, standing in the doorway of his own building, was clarity. A cold, clean clarity, like a window suddenly wiped free of fog. "I see," Marcus said. And he did. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand an explanation. He did not point out, as he easily could have, that the office Julian was lounging in existed because of the building Marcus owned, or that the salary Julian was about to draw would be paid out of revenues Marcus's original loan had made possible. He simply looked at Diana for a long moment, and then he turned and he walked back to the elevator. And he wrote it down, 14 floors, in silence. In the lobby, the receptionist, whose name was Grace and who had known Marcus for 16 years, looked up at him with concern in her eyes. She had heard the whispers. She had watched Julian arrive with his boxes. "Mr. Bellamy," she said quietly, "are you all right?" Marcus stopped. He considered the question honestly. "I'm going to be," he said. And then, because Grace had always been kind to him, he added something he would not have said to anyone else. "Grace, do me a favor. Keep your resume current. Not because of anything you've done, just as a general principle." She frowned, not understanding, but she nodded, and Marcus walked out into the March morning. Now, I want you to understand something about Marcus Bellamy, because it matters for everything that follows. He was not a cruel man. He had never in his life set out to hurt another person. When he sat in his car in the parking garage that morning, his hands resting on the wheel, he did not think about revenge. He thought about the fact that his wife had built her entire public identity on a foundation she pretended did not exist, and that she had just, in front of a stranger, told him he had never mattered. He thought about the 20 years. He thought about the recessions he had steered them through while she slept soundly, believing the company was invincible. And he thought, with the precision that had always been his gift, about the architecture of it all. Because Marcus understood structures. He understood which beam, if removed, would bring the whole thing down. And he had just been informed, in the clearest possible terms, that he was free to remove it. He drove not home, but to an office. 3 blocks away, a modest suite with frosted glass, and the name Hartwell and Associates on the door. Eleanor Hartwell had been Marcus's attorney for 20 years since before Meridian existed, and she was one of the few people alive who knew the full shape of what Marcus owned. She was 62, silver-haired, and possessed of a memory that missed nothing. When Marcus walked into her office unannounced, she took one look at his face and told her assistant to hold her calls. "Something happened," Eleanor said. It was not a question. Marcus sat down across from her. He told her about the desk, about Julian, about what Diana had said. He told it plainly, without drama, in the same voice he might have used to describe a fluctuation in the markets. Eleanor listened without interrupting, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a moment, tapping a pen against her desk. "You've carried that company on your back for 16 years, she said finally. "And she just told you in front of her new hire that you never existed." That's the substance of it, Marcus said. Eleanor leaned back. So, what do you want to do, Marcus? Because you and I both know that with one phone call, you could make her life very complicated. But that isn't who you are. So tell me, what are we doing here? And this is where I want you to pay close attention, because what Marcus said next tells you everything about the kind of man he was. He did not say, make her suffer. He did not say, destroy her. He said something colder and more precise than either of those things. He said, I want to stop pretending. For 16 years, I've been holding up a company by pretending I wasn't holding it. I've been subsidizing a life that treats me as an inconvenience. I don't want revenge, Eleanor. I want the truth to have consequences. I want to withdraw completely, and I want to do it entirely by the book. Eleanor studied him. You understand what that means. The lease, the loan, the vendor guarantees. I understand exactly what it means, Marcus said. I built every one of those contracts. I know which ones are load-bearing. He met her eyes. Cancel every contract that runs through me, every guarantee, every arrangement where my name or my capital is what makes it work. Give the required notice on all of it, precisely as the terms specify. No shortcuts, no cruelty. Just the truth, delivered on paper, exactly on schedule. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a legal pad toward her and picked up her pen. All right, she said. Let's begin with the building. Here is what Marcus and Eleanor understood that Diana did not. Meridian Design Group looked from the outside like a thriving firm. It had 140 employees, a gleaming headquarters, a portfolio of prestigious clients, and a chief executive who was a minor celebrity. But underneath the gleam, the structure was resting on 3 specific supports, all of which belonged to Marcus. The first was the building lease. Meridian occupied 4 floors of the tower under a lease that charged roughly 40% of the market rate, a discount worth nearly $1.5 million a year, arranged by Marcus through his property company. That lease, by its own terms, could be terminated by the owner with 90 days written notice. The second support was the original loan. 16 years ago, Marcus's family trust had extended Diana a founding loan, and over the years, that loan had been refinanced and restructured into a line of credit that Meridian still drew on for its cash flow, particularly to cover the gap between when it paid its designers. That line of credit was guaranteed by Marcus personally. It could be called, and the guarantee withdrawn upon 30 days' notice, again by its own written terms. The third support was the quietest, and, it turned out, the most devastating. Over the years, Marcus had personally co-signed and guaranteed the firm's contracts with its 2 largest vendors, a specialty materials supplier and a fabrication partner, because when Meridian was young, no vendor would extend it credit without a solid personal guarantee behind it. Diana had never bothered to have those guarantees renegotiated once the firm grew, because they cost her nothing and she had frankly forgotten they existed. Marcus had not forgotten. Marcus never forgot anything. Each of these supports could be withdrawn lawfully, with proper notice, without a single act of malice, and, when they were withdrawn together, the effect would not be an explosion. It would be something quieter and far more inexorable. It would be the slow, dignified collapse of a structure that had been standing on borrowed strength. Eleanor drafted the notices over the next 4 days. Marcus reviewed each one personally, checking the notice periods, the certified mail requirements, the exact wording, ensuring that every single document was flawless, that nothing could be challenged, that there was no basis for any claim of bad faith. He wanted this to be unassailable. He wanted it to be so correct that when Diana's lawyers looked at it, they would have nothing to say except that everything had been done exactly as the contracts required. While Marcus prepared, life at Meridian continued in blissful ignorance. Diana, energized by her decision, threw herself into a new direction for the firm, with Julian Vance at her side. Julian, it emerged, was not merely her new chief operations officer. The photograph on the desk, The one that was not Marcus's was of Diana and Julian at a gala Marcus had not attended. The affair had been going on for the better part of a year. Julian had convinced Diana that the firm was too conservative, too dependent on old relationships, and that, with the right modern leadership, it could double in size. Diana had believed him, because Julian said the things she wanted to hear and because Julian, unlike Marcus, filled a room with the same weather she did. 10 days after Marcus found Julian at his desk, the first notice arrived at Meridian's offices by certified mail. It was the lease termination. 90 days notice, effective immediately upon receipt, that the property company would not be renewing Meridian's lease and was exercising its right to terminate. Diana read it in her office, frowned, and handed it to Julian. "This is a mistake," Julian said, scanning it. "Some property management error, I'll call them." He called the number on the letterhead and reached a receptionist at a company he had never heard of, who told him politely that the matter had been referred to the owner's attorney, Eleanor Hartwell, and that any inquiries should be directed there. Julian, still convinced this was a bureaucratic hiccup, made a note to deal with it later. He did not recognize the name Hartwell. Why would he? He had been in Diana's world for less than a year. 3 days later, the second notice arrived. This one was from the trust, calling the line of credit and withdrawing the personal guarantee that backed it. 30 days notice, exactly as the terms specified. Diana read this one twice. A cold feeling began somewhere at the base of her spine, though she could not yet name it. The line of credit was how Meridian made payroll during the lean weeks. Without it, the firm's cash flow, which looked so healthy on paper, would seize up like an engine run dry of oil. She called Marcus that evening. It was the first time she had spoken to him since the morning at the office. He was at the small apartment he had quietly leased, an apartment she did not know existed. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had none of the hardness it had carried in the office. "There's clearly been some confusion. I'm getting these letters, something about the lease and a line of credit, and I need you to sort it out with whoever is responsible." There was a pause on the line. When Marcus spoke, his voice was calm and almost gentle. "There's no confusion, Diana." "What do you mean?" "No confusion. I mean that the letters are correct," Marcus said. "The building is owned by a property company. I own the property company. I own the building, Diana. I bought it in the crash, the year you said it was too risky. Meridian has been leasing it from me at 40% of market rate for 11 years. The lease is being terminated according to its terms. And the line of credit your firm uses for payroll is backed by my personal guarantee through my family's trust. I'm withdrawing that guarantee according to its terms." He let that settle. "I told you the truth in that office, Diana. You told me I never mattered. I'm simply removing the parts of the company that were only ever there because of me. It's the honest thing to do, don't you think?" The silence on the line stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Then Diana said very quietly, "You wouldn't." "I already have," Marcus said. "Everything's been filed properly. You'll want to speak to your attorneys. Good night, Diana." And he hung up. I want to pause here, because I think it's important that you understand what Diana felt in that moment. Sitting alone in her expensive home, holding a phone that had gone dead in her hand. It was not simply fear about money, though the fear was real. It was the terrible, vertiginous feeling of the ground rearranging itself beneath her. For 16 years, she had believed a story about herself. She had believed she was the architect, the visionary, the one who had built Meridian from nothing through her own brilliance. And in the space of 2 phone calls and 2 letters, that story had cracked open, and through the crack she could see the truth she had spent 16 years refusing to look at. The man she had dismissed as an inconvenience, the quiet man she had told did not matter, had been the foundation the entire time, and she had just fired him from a company that could not survive without him. The next morning, Diana called an emergency meeting with the firm's own attorneys and its chief financial officer. The CFO, a careful man named Pruitt, who had been with the firm for 9 years, arrived at the meeting already pale, because he had spent the previous night going through the books after Diana forwarded him the letters. He laid it out for her with the reluctant precision of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "The lease," Pruitt said, "is real, and it's exactly as the letter says. We're paying about $900,000 a year for 4 floors that would cost us nearly $2.3 million at market rate anywhere comparable. If we have to move and pay market rent, that alone erases most of our margin. And moving a firm this size in 90 days, building out new space, it's, frankly, close to impossible." He turned a page. "The line of credit is worse. We draw on it every month to cover the gap before client payments come in. Without the guarantee behind it, the bank will freeze it. I've already confirmed that this morning. We have enough cash on hand for 1 payroll cycle, maybe 2 if we delay vendor payments." He hesitated. "And that brings me to the vendors." Diana looked up sharply. "What about the vendors?" Pruitt slid a third document across the table. This one had arrived that morning, and it was the notice that Marcus and Eleanor had timed to land last, the quiet bomb. "Our contracts with Corvain Materials and with the Ashford Fabrication Group," Pruitt said, "are guaranteed personally by Marcus. His guarantee is what gives us net 90 payment terms and priority allocation. That guarantee is being withdrawn. Both vendors have been notified. Corvain has already responded. As of the withdrawal date, they'll require full prepayment on all orders, and they've canceled our priority status." He set down the paper. "Diana Corvain supplies the materials for the Whitmore project, the one that's due in 6 weeks, the one that's 40% of this year's revenue. Without priority allocation and net terms, we can't source the materials in time, and we can't pay for them up front because the line of credit is frozen." The room went silent. Julian, who had been sitting at Diana's right hand throughout, spoke for the first time. "This is obviously coordinated harassment," he said. "This is a jilted husband throwing a tantrum. We'll sue him. We'll get an injunction." Eleanor Hartwell would later describe what happened next, when Meridian's lawyers actually examined the documents, as the most anticlimactic legal review of her career, because there was nothing to fight. Every notice was perfect. Every notice period was honored to the day. Every contract clearly permitted exactly what Marcus was doing. There was no fraud, no breach, no bad faith, no coercion. There was only a man exercising rights he had always held, in strict accordance with agreements Diana herself had signed. Meridian's lead attorney, after 2 days of review, told Diana the truth she did not want to hear. "There's no case here. He isn't doing anything to you. He's simply declining to keep doing things for you. And there's no law that requires a man to keep subsidizing a company that fired him." Julian, who did not understand structures, kept insisting they could fight it until the day the reality reached the employees. Because payroll, it turned out, was not an abstraction. Payroll was 140 families. When Pruitt reported that the frozen line of credit meant the next payroll could not be met in full, the whispers Grace had heard in the lobby became a roar. The senior designers, the ones whose work had actually filled the portfolio, began quietly making calls. 2 of them, the most talented, had lunch that week with a competing firm. And here is where the poetic architecture of it all became visible. Because those 2 senior designers, before they took another job, did something that people rarely do for a boss who has told them they do not matter. They went to find Marcus. They tracked down his apartment and they knocked on his door. And when he opened it, they asked him a single question. "Is it true? Did you build all this? The building, the credit, the vendor deals?" Marcus, who had never once claimed credit for anything, told them the plain truth. "Yes," he said, "but it was Diana's talent that used it. I only ever built the foundation. She built the house on top." Even now, at the moment of his vindication, he refused to be unkind about her work. The designers looked at each other, and then the older of the 2, a woman named Priya, who had been with Meridian for 12 years, said, "We always wondered why the deals were so good. We always wondered how she pulled off things no other firm our size could pull off. We just assumed it was her. She paused. It was you the whole time, and you let her have it. I didn't need it, Marcus said simply. I want you to understand what that moment did, because it is the true turning point of this story, more than any legal notice. Word spread through Meridian from Priya and her colleague to the rest of the senior staff that the quiet man Diana had thrown out of his own office had in fact been the invisible architect of everything they were proud of. And the enablers, the people who had watched Diana treat Marcus as furniture and said nothing, now faced the choice that always comes in these stories, the choice between loyalty to a comfortable lie and integrity in the face of an uncomfortable truth. One by one, they chose integrity, not out of loyalty to Marcus, whom most of them barely knew, out of the simple recognition that they had been lied to about who deserved their respect. Diana, meanwhile, was living through the reversal of fortune in real time. She, who had commanded stages, now spent her days on the phone begging vendors for extensions they would not grant. She, who had brought Julian into Marcus's office as a symbol of the future, now watched Julian's confidence curdle into blame. Because Julian, it turned out, was very good at describing a glorious future and completely useless at holding up a collapsing present. When the Whitmore project began to slip, when the client called to ask why materials had not been ordered, Julian's grand vision evaporated, and what remained was a man who had staked his reputation on doubling a company he did not understand. 6 weeks after the first notice, Diana called Marcus again. This time her voice was not hard, and it was not confused. It was small. The Whitmore project is going to collapse, she said. The client is going to walk. We can't source the materials. Half my senior staff have resigned. Julian is gone. He left last week. A long breath. Marcus, I know I have no right to ask, but if you would restore even the vendor guarantees, just the vendor guarantees, I could save Whitmore, and Whitmore could save the firm. And now Marcus faced his own choice, the one that separates a man of integrity from a man of mere vengeance. He could say no. He could let it all fall, and no one would have blamed him, given what she had done. But Marcus had told Eleanor at the very beginning that he did not want revenge. He wanted the truth to have consequences. And the truth, having had its consequences, now presented him with a different question. What did he actually want to build from the rubble? I'll meet with you, Marcus said, tomorrow at Eleanor's office. Bring Pruitt, not the lawyers, just you and Pruitt. They met in the modest suite with the frosted glass. Diana looked, Eleanor would later say, 10 years older than she had 6 weeks before. Marcus sat across from her, calm as ever, and he laid out not a punishment, but a proposal. I'm not going to let 140 people lose their jobs to teach you a lesson, he said. You've learned it already. I can see that you have. So here's what's going to happen, and it isn't negotiable. He slid a document across the table, one Eleanor had drafted that morning. I'll restore the vendor guarantees and reinstate the line of credit, which saves Whitmore and saves the firm. In exchange, my ownership of the building and my role as the firm's principal creditor will be made formal, documented, and public. No more invisible architecture. I become a named partner and chair of the board. You remain chief executive because your talent is real and the firm needs it. But the story the company tells about itself, going forward, will be the true one. Both of us built this, not one of us. Both. Diana read the document with tears standing in her eyes, and she understood that he was offering her something she did not deserve and had not asked for. He was offering her the company back, on the condition that they stop lying about who had made it. She signed it. Of course she signed it. But the deepest part of the resolution had nothing to do with the document. It came at the end of the meeting when Pruitt had gone and only Marcus and Diana remained. Why? She asked him. After what I did, after what I said, why would you save it? And Marcus gave her the answer. That is the moral center of this entire story, because I never wanted to destroy you, Diana, he said. I wanted to be seen. That's all it ever was. For 16 years, I held this thing up in the dark, and I told myself I didn't need the light. But when you put a stranger in my chair and told me I never mattered, I understood that a person can only live in the dark for so long before it starts to feel like a grave. I didn't cancel those contracts to hurt you, and I canceled them so that everyone, including you, would finally have to see the foundation they'd all been standing on. Now that they've seen it, there's no reason to let good people fall. He stood, and he buttoned his jacket. We're not going to be married anymore. That ended in the office, and we both know it. But we can build something honest out of what's left. That's worth more to me than watching it burn. The firm survived. Whitmore was delivered. Late, but delivered, and the client stayed. The senior designers who had resigned when they heard the true story and saw the new structure, most of them came back because it turned out that people would rather work for a company built on truth than for a myth built on a lie. Grace, the receptionist Marcus had quietly warned, kept her job and eventually became the office manager, and she told anyone who asked that Marcus Bellamy was the only genuinely humble, powerful man she had ever met. Julian Vance drifted to another city and another firm and another woman who wanted to hear about a glorious future, because that is what men like Julian do. And Marcus, for the first time in 16 years, walked into the building he owned, with his name on the door, and sat in an office that was recognized as his, and did the same quiet, essential work he had always done. The only thing that had changed was that now, when he did it, people knew. So, let me leave you with the truth that sits underneath all of this, the one Marcus understood long before anyone else did. Real worth is not the same as visible worth. The people holding up the world are very often the quiet ones at the back of the room, the ones who never demand the applause. And the tragedy of arrogance is that it mistakes silence for weakness and humility for absence. Marcus never needed to prove his value. He only needed, in the end, to stop pretending he had none. And the moment he stopped pretending, everything that had been true all along simply became visible. Here is what I want to ask you. Have you ever been the quiet one, holding something up in the dark, waiting to be seen? Or have you ever, if you're honest, been the one who failed to see the foundation you were standing on? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and because I think we all recognize a little of ourselves in both. If this story moved you, please like it and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And share it with someone who has ever been underestimated. Wherever you're listening from tonight, remember this: respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned, and it can only be given. And the truth, however long it stays in the dark, always eventually finds the light.